This video answers some of the common questions about what to do in the spring garden. And I do say spring garden rather than mentioning a month like April, because if we're temperate gardeners, and that really means the UK, Northern Europe, the southern tip of Australia, USDA zones 5 to 9, we are all dealing with many of the same issues and we grow many of the same plants. We have bulbs, we have blossom, we're thinking about weeding and whether we should dig. It's Alexandra here from the Middlesized Garden YouTube channel and blog. And I'll put links to any resources I mention in the description below. And if you're new here, the Middlesized Garden uploads weekly with tips, ideas and inspiration for your garden. So if you'd like to see the videos regularly, tap subscribe. If you're just emerging from freezing weather, I've got an early spring garden tips video which I'll put in the description below. But here in southeast England, the daffodils are over and the tulips are really singing their song. And so the first tip that I have for you is that when your bulb flowers go over, snip them off, deadhead them. We're used to deadheading plants like asters and dahlias and things like that, but it really helps for bulbs. They won't grow another flower this year, but they will use all the nutrition they get from the soil and from the sun to make the best possible flowers in the bulb for next year. So you should get better flowers next year if you snip off your deadheads this year. And what you can also do is to add some fertiliser, something like a liquid seaweed feed. To give you an overview of this garden, it's a walled town garden in southeast England, and it's 100 feet long, and it's an L shape, so it's 80 feet wide at its widest and 40 feet wide nearer the house. And around the edges there are borders, none of which at the moment are really doing very much. And as you step outside the back door, there's a parterre which has some big bushes of lavender, and although they are nice evergreen chunks throughout the winter and now, once again, they're not doing very much either. In the rest of the year, the main action is usually in the big herbaceous border on the right of the parterre. But at the moment, it's just waiting to come into its full flower. The perennials are just coming up, and there would be quite a lot of bare earth if it wasn't for Euphorbia robii, which is spreading its bright citrus green flowers all over the border. Now, Euphorbia robii is quite invasive, so in a few weeks' time I'll pull it up and I'll let the other perennials come through, but just at the moment it's adding a nice touch of green. But the area that really shines at this time of the year is where there is a group of trees. During the rest of the year, this is a very shaded area, and because of the trees, it's also quite dry. So not much goes on here. But in the winter, they're deciduous trees, so they lose their leaves in winter, and it's a wonderful place to plant bulbs. So when you're planting your bulbs next autumn, do think about planting them under deciduous trees and shrubs. The leaves are off the trees, which means that the bulbs get plenty of sunlight, and once their flowers are over, their leaves gather the sunlight in order to make the flowers for next year. And then by the time they've finished that process, the leaves have grown back on the trees again, and it's a shady area, but it works perfectly in terms of the timing. But there are a few mistakes here that I'd like to point out so that you don't have to make them. And one is that when you're planting tulips, it's so easy to forget about heights. As you can see, I've got big tulips on the edge of the border and little tulips in the middle, and that's kind of not ideal. It's not the end of the world, they're lovely colours, but if you want to get a border looking sort of graded, it's not so good. The other thing is that these little orange tulips, Princess Irene, are really not as tall as they should be. They should have been 30 centimetres high, they're more like 20, and that's because we've had a very dry spring. Tulips have got all the nutrition they need to create the flower in their bulb, but they do need a bit of extra water in a very dry spring. So if I'd wanted these to grow to their full height, or if I'd remembered that they needed to grow to their full height, I should have watered them about 3 to 4 weeks ago. I try not to do too much watering in this garden, but I just thought it was a tip you might like to know. The other thing to notice about the tulips in this garden is that in some places I've got clumps of tulips and they have come back year after year. And the most satisfactory clump is a tulip called ballerina. It's got a lovely scent and its flowers last a long time, so it's a wonderful tulip. But the most important thing is that I planted it 12 inches deep. That's much deeper than you're normally recommended to plant it, but I went to a garden workshop about 15 years ago, given by Sarah Raven, and I'll put that in the description below. And she told us to plant our tulips 12 inches deep. It keeps it away from the squirrels and the other mammals that might eat the tulips, but somehow it seems to make them come back better. And of course, the ballerina tulips seem nice and tall, and that might be that they're able to access the moisture deeper down in the soil. I put this on Instagram recently, and quite a few other gardeners did come back and say, oh yes, I always plant my tulips really deep as well, and it works for me. So that's another tip you might consider for when you're planting tulips in the autumn. The other thing about these tulip borders is that they're somewhat unintentional. Most tulips really don't come back, or they'll come back in bits and pieces. And I can see that this border is a result of my having had a good idea about a colour scheme about 5 years ago, and one of those tulips is still coming back, and then maybe 4 years ago I had a different idea and one of those tulips is coming back. And the whole thing doesn't add up very cohesively, and also the tulips are popping up not so much in clumps but in ones and twos. And much as I loathe digging things up, I think that when these tulips are flowered I will dig them up. And next autumn, when I'm planting tulips, I'll think through some kind of coherent colour scheme. One mistake I would like to point out here is that I haven't been ruthless enough. You might well think, and you might well be right, that I'm not being ruthless enough with the Euphorbia robbii, but I'm also not being ruthless enough with this hydrangea munchkin. The rest of the year, this is, as I said, a dry shaded area, and I've got a video I'll put in the description below about choosing plants for dry shade. And one of them I chose was this oak leaf hydrangea, because oak leaf hydrangeas withstand drought better than other hydrangeas. However, once I planted it, this self-seeded foxglove grew up far too close to it, and I know it's going to look beautiful. A proper gardener would take that foxglove out and allow the hydrangea to flourish. But I just can't bear to, so I'm going to be a bad gardener and leave it. However, I am going to make it a little bit easier on the hydrangea by giving it some extra watering and some extra fertilising, because it's the competition for food and water that makes plants so unhappy if they're just crowded together too much. One of the questions people ask a lot about spring gardening is, when should I dig my garden? Well, if you've watched many of these videos, you'll know I don't dig my garden in spring. Indeed, I don't dig my garden at all. You will see advice in the to-do lists to dig over your garden thoroughly at this time of year. But no dig, no till is becoming much more popular, not just in gardening, but also in farming. And I've done no dig since I came to this garden 20 years ago, partly because my back just wasn't good enough to dig anyway, so I just didn't do it. And then I was really thrilled to discover that it was a thing. There's a video I did with Charles Dowding, which I'll put in the description below, about no dig for flower borders. But the essence is that you don't dig unless you're taking a plant out or putting one in. And at this time of the year, you put a layer of mulch on your garden. And I have seen so many different suggestions as to what the mulch could be and how thick the layer should be. I think the important thing is put mulch on your garden. It could be garden compost, it could be well-rotted manure. There's a product called Strulch. There's also bark chippings and all sorts of things like that. But that layer will be drawn in by the worms and the microorganisms, and it'll make your soil more fertile, so you won't have to fertilise so many plants. Which brings me on to the next spring gardening question, which is, when should I fertilise my garden? And I think it's important at this stage to divide up fertilising your plants with improving your soil. If you scatter an all-purpose fertiliser onto your border, you're not improving your soil. If you put the layer of mulch on your soil once or twice a year, your soil will have more nutrition and your plants will grow better. But there are certain plants that really even need more than that, and roses are the most noticeable ones of those. People who find their roses aren't doing well usually aren't feeding them. And now in spring is a very good time to fertilise your roses. So I would mulch your soil generally, but only fertilise the plants that really need it, and roses definitely are one of those. I bought this year some David Austin organic rose feed. I've also used Fostrogen and Osmocote in the past, and I'll put links to those in the description below. And another question people ask about spring gardening is, how do I prevent weeds in spring? Well, the sad thing is you can't prevent weeds in spring. It doesn't matter whether you use a weed control membrane, if you have artificial grass, if you have stone, if you have concrete, if you have gravel. All surfaces get weeds. Weeds are amazing. They will crawl in almost anywhere. However, the more you weed in spring, then the less the weeds will reproduce later in the year. I personally find hand weeding or hoeing works best. I don't use weeding sprays just because they always drift, even on the stillest day. They'll always drift and move to the plants that I want to keep. And one thing also that's important to note is that mulching I've been talking about, it does help suppress annual weeds. Nothing will get rid of annual weeds completely, but a layer of mulch actually suffocates them a little bit. So it means there won't be as many annual weeds as otherwise. If there's one job I'd really recommend focusing on in spring, it's weeding, because weeding properly now will save you more time later on. And if you're thinking about weeding tips, or perhaps you'd just like to see if there's an easier way of weeding, I've got a video at the end of this video where I've collected together the weeding tips from a number of gardening experts. So do take a look at that, and do let me know if you've got any good spring gardening tips. And thank you for watching. Goodbye.